Hi everyone. So I am here tonight to talk to you about the pressure of self-imposed deadlines. So for those that don't know me, I am Emma Cowling, and the reason for running this class and for reason for our theme this week being all about pressure is from originally, I haven't shared this, but from a comment that one of the group shared, actually over on LinkedIn, just about how they'd noticed that how anxious they were getting and how much anxiety and pressure they put themselves through when they were going for something during the day. They were setting themselves tasks during the day, and they'd noticed that they were setting these for themselves, and but that was causing them an anxiety. So they made that link that they were actually causing their own challenges and their own struggle and their own strife through, and that they could stop doing that. And I just kind of put a comment saying how much impact that had on me, that realization. And she challenged me to do a share in the group, and to talk about it. So I thought this was a really good thing to explore, because I don't think we do realize quite how much pressure we put on ourselves by the things that we challenge ourselves to do. And we also don't question the impact that that pressure can have and whether that pressure is beneficial. So we just take it as this is the way that we should live. And so tonight I'm here to kind of challenge that, to encourage you to think about deadlines, where they come from, how many of them are self-imposed, the ones that are self-imposed, let's unpick them, and I'll be talking about that in a minute. And then that pressure, why do we do it? Why do we put ourselves under so much pressure? And how we do it, so it must be beneficial in some areas. So we must have learned at some stage, it must be giving us something. Whenever we do something, there's some benefit to us, whether we've misunderstood it or not. It might be that we've got a misunderstanding about the benefit that pressure brings, and we need to kind of just question it and notice, and that's where things shift. So that's what I'm wanting to do tonight, is just really encourage you to get curious about deadlines, pressure, and what we do to ourselves, and to just go out there and notice off the back of this and see how things change. So that's what I'm here for tonight. If you have any comments, any questions, whether you're live or not, I'm happy to answer them online, offline, and as we go along or after the event. So please do drop them in the comments. If you're live, then and you want me to know who you are, then let StreamYard have permission. That's great to see. It's always useful to know who I'm chatting to, but I absolutely respect your privacy as well if you prefer not to give them all your data. So I completely understand that. The other thing I'd say is that I would love to encourage you to use this as a kind of a practical application. So before we get going, before we start, just check in and see if you can kind of connect with a deadline, a challenge that you have at the moment, that you have going on somewhere, something that's happening. And it doesn't matter whether you feel like it's in self-imposed or not. Just check in and what's a deadline that you're pushing for? Maybe it's a deadline that you've got some stress around, maybe it's not. Whatever it is, just check in. And this could be useful to talk it through and to think it through, because when we start to kind of make this stuff real, it's when the real benefit comes. So you might pick it just simply, it might be your to-do list. It might be that you have a set of things that you want to get done today, or that you said you were going to get done today, because in the UK, we're coming to the end of the day, and there's still some you haven't got done. So there's some deadlines for you. You've set yourself a deadline that by the end of the day, you're going to get these tasks done. And so let's explore that. Let's explore what your thinking is around that, and whether you've got pressure there or not, and just notice what's going on for you. I know there's a couple of things I haven't got done today that I really hoped I could, and I also went off on a tangent earlier today on doing something else instead. But I'm very good at setting myself too much to do, and then noticing how much pressure I end up in the end of the day, and then laughing at myself for how stupid I am for doing that, because that's what starts to happen. We do it anyway, but then we notice how we get pulled into the trap. And we don't have to take it quite so seriously. So if you have a think, get in your head a deadline or a task that you feel like you need to do, which has got a timeline against it. and let's explore where the pressure might come from, what pressure there is, and please do share as you go along. Again, whether you're watching this live or not, let's share what's coming to you, because that's a really good way of just getting it out there and exploring it. So let's. The thing I wanted to start with is, okay, what do we mean by deadlines, and what are deadlines? Now, I came across this, someone had mentioned this to me before, but I thought this is really funny that if you go back and look at the definition of deadline, where did it come from? Where did it start? And actually, a deadline was in the 1860s, apparently, is where it first started appearing in writing. It was a line that they would put around a group of prisoners in a prison, and if they crossed that line, they would be at risk of being shot. So it was to try and keep the prisoners in one place. So and they wouldn't put up fences; they'd put a line around, and if the prisoner went over that line, they could be shot. So it really was a deadline. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing to explore, because when we go for deadlines, when a deadline is upon us, boy, do we act like sometimes it's a matter of life and death. But very rarely that it is. Very rarely that actually something we're gonna be shot as a result of it not happening. So it's just something to reflect on how seriously we take them, and how the name kind of encourages us to do that, but we don't have to. Now, later on, deadlines then appeared kind of really, it was encouraged by and came through from the printing press. So a deadline became the last time that they could take the news and get it out on the next day's paper, or get it out through the print to do that. So that's where then deadlines started to appear with having a time limit upon them. And then it's being kind of moved into our day-to-day culture, where deadlines are everywhere. And really, what I now just wanted to encourage you to think about, and maybe use the deadline that you've come up with as an idea, as a way of exploring this, is just think about, well, what is it that makes a deadline a deadline? What are the things that it has to have? What qualities is it? So clearly a deadline has time associated with it. It is a time by which we must do something. But the do something is in there. So it's the time by which we must complete a task. So we've put a time stamp on when we expect to complete a task by. But that's quite a simple definition. But actually, when you start unpicking and thinking about it, it becomes more than that, because we also start to add in not just the task, but a level of quality at which we're going to deliver that task. So the quality, the time, the task that's there, and we kind of start to build up expectations around it. And really, the thing I just want to encourage in this is how we can start to blow the deadline out of all proportion, and maybe not at the initial stages. I know, and I do this, and I start to kind of, it feels like, yeah, I can do that, no problem at all. And then what happens is that we get to the point where we start building on it, and we start adding expectations and anticipations, and we talk to people about it, and it evolves and it grows, and we get requirements creep, and then suddenly the thing that we're delivering is not the thing that we thought we were delivering. And it's probably not the thing that other people think we're delivering either. And we get some confusion in there. So that requirements creep is one of the things that can add to the pressure. So I just wanted to start by just highlighting that, and also to say that deadlines are really useful. They're great tools. I mean, there's a reason why we use them. They are tools to help us to communicate to other people what our expectations are when we're going to deliver. When we're working in a team, it's really useful to be able to say to someone, I'm planning to deliver by this date, so that you can then pick that up and do your thing, or then we can merge our stuff. Or actually delivering to the customer, we need to communicate when and keep their expectations managed about when that might happen. They're going to pay us some money, and we've got to create an estimate of how much that's going to be. And so deadlines can be really useful tools. And so there's nothing wrong with deadlines. What I'd like to, and I'm encouraging you to do, is just question the pressure that we put around them, and question and really think about what deadlines are, because that just then encourages us to notice when they're bringing us benefit, which is when we should use them. And when they're not bringing us benefit, when they're not adding value, then maybe we start to shift them and change them and start to question them. So really that's what I wanted to just explore to start with. And I'd love to hear, just share in the comments, are there any other qualities that you would add to a deadline? Are there any other things that you would say, actually, this deadline I have, it also has this as well? Or what is it? What is it that shifts for you in a deadline? Do you move the timing around? Do you move the task around? Do you move your expectations around? And do other people as well? So really just kind of get thinking about that and notice what comes to you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is deadlines and how we impose the self-imposed deadlines. What do I mean by self-imposed deadlines? Well, I mean, how do we then translate those deadlines into our reality and into our understanding of what needs to happen? And from that, I would then come round to, actually, all deadlines are self-imposed. Now, this is where I'd really like to hear what you have to think. So the deadline that you have in your mind, do you feel like it's self-imposed? Or do you feel like someone is kind of giving it to you? And the reason this is to unpick this is because, yes, we can be given a date by which we need to deliver something. Yes, our boss can say to us, I need that on the desk and I need you to do that by this date. Or we could be given a thing that if we don't put a bid in by this particular date, we just won't succeed. Or we can be, our company might fall apart if we don't manage to bring some funding in by that particular date. So yes, there are some external factors that influence the deadlines, but in actual fact, we take that information, we translate it in our head, we put thoughts around it and create the expectations, create what the task is, create the information. And that's where we start to impose it on ourselves. That's when we start to say, this is what has to happen. And I'd really just encourage you again to unpick the idea that you have in your head and notice how much of the task, of the date, of the time, of the expectations, of the quality levels, of those things, how many of those are things that you can see that you have imposed on that deadline yourself? Because when we start to see the bits that are self-imposed, we start to have some flexibility of what to do with them. And then maybe, some of these deadlines may be, if I don't hit them, I'll lose my job. And let's be realistic with that. Some of these deadlines have consequences as a result of us not hitting them. And they have major consequences. But it's your choice as to whether you want to take that deadline, and you can choose. You always have a choice about whether you want to deliver against it and get the chance of delivering and keeping your job, or actually going, do you know what? I don't want this anymore. There's always a choice in there, and the consequences are the things that you are playing off against. So I just wanted to flag that up, and it's an interesting one that I will come back to. So they're self-imposed, and it's the point at which they are self-imposed is the point where we sign up and commit to them. We choose, okay, I'm going to take this on. Yes, I'm going to accept this deadline. Yes, to the quality that I believe. And we translate that into our world. And it's that translation that kind of puts that self-imposition on that. So when I say the pressure of self-imposed deadlines, I'm saying the pressure of all deadlines. Let's talk about the pressure of all deadlines and the impact that has on us and how we get around it. So we are kind of in this world where this is the game we're playing. And the next question for me is, okay, so pressure, where does the pressure come from when we are setting some deadlines? Because deadlines don't all have pressure. A deadline doesn't equal pressure, but we often feel pressure as a result of them, but we don't always. So there's no truth that says deadline equals pressure. So where does the pressure come from? Well, very often pressure comes from the fact that we don't predict it in the way that we think, that we don't estimate the time correctly. We underestimate, we over push ourselves, we overstretch ourselves. The consequences are different to what we expected. The quality levels are, we change them, or they're different to how we anticipated, or we just don't have the time. We get distracted by something else, and we don't have the amount of time available that we thought we might. So suddenly the thing that we might have signed up to at the beginning that felt okay, that there was no pressure around, shifts to become something which is high pressure. And so we start pushing ourselves to carry on meeting it, and carry on kind of striving and making sure that we deliver against the thing that we've committed to. But deadlines are future focused. They're always in the future, and so there's always some uncertainty around them. We can never predict the future exactly. So it's not surprising that quite often deadlines start to turn into pressure. And the other thing that is that we as humans, we're not really very good at estimating. And in fact, we like to think we can do a hell of a lot more than we actually can do. So what happens is that we have a tendency to underestimate, and to kind of think that we can do better than we are, or to allow the requirements creep to come in and get carried away with something. And so more often than not, that pressure comes in because we can't hit the deadline anymore, because it's not how we originally imagined. So that's where the pressure starts to come from. It's because we're not delivering, and then we're concerned about the judgments of other people, the judgments of ourselves. What does it mean about us? What does it mean about who I am and what I can do? And we start to take it personally and feel like we're going to fail if we don't deliver against this. And that's a huge amount of pressure to put on ourselves. We're going to fail. We are a failure. We start making our identity. If I don't hit this deadline, I'm going to be a failure. But actually, all it's telling us is that we didn't predict correctly. And actually, do you know what? We're human, and that's what we do. We try and predict things and we don't get it right. So let's just be a bit kinder on ourselves to start with. So our expectations don't kind of meet the reality. The pressure starts kind of feeding in, and it starts to kind of impact us. And actually, this is now what I want to do is just explore, because pressure isn't always a bad thing. Again, I'm not here to say never put yourself under pressure. And this is something that's come through in the group, in the poll earlier this week. I sort of said, what does pressure do for you? And a lot of people said, actually, pressure pushes me in a way that I like. It gets me to get things done. So let me just explore that for a moment. So when is the pressure of deadlines? When is it useful? And actually, pressure can push us and motivate us to do things that we wouldn't try to do. It gets us to complete things, and actually it gets us to complete things and just get going on stuff and do more than we think we can sometimes. And I know that this weekend I was kind of putting pressure on myself, because there was things that I kind of had ideas about, and I could see this way of doing and creating an event, and I started, there was all sorts of things going on in my head, and I could feel the pressure. And that pressure, while it was actually quite as I started to notice, it was quite a fun thing. It was kind of like, oh, what can I do? How can I really do this? Come on, let's keep pushing myself and see how much I can do, and really kind of being impressed with myself about how much came through. And so when we put ourselves under pressure, we often find we can achieve more than we think we can, and that's something to notice. But the problem when pressure kind of can take over is that when it's actually pushing us to run on adrenaline, and that adrenaline rush feels great at the time, but it can wear us out. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. How else can pressure of deadlines be useful? Well, this is what I was exploring with my husband earlier today, in that, so we did quite a few bids together, and I used to get really frustrated with him, because he would kind of sort of get going and come back to it and not seem to be doing anything until the deadline, until there was kind of like a week to go, and then he'd get really in the flow because the deadline was coming up, and he kind of needed that deadline to push him into the flow and to really get that creative energy coming through. And he sees this, and he uses deadlines in that way. He kind of recognizes that sometimes he needs a deadline to meet things. And I do that too. It's kind of sometimes good to put something in the ground and say, right, I'm gonna push myself to get to there and see what happens, and just allow that. allow it to push me into the flow. And the bit that came through in our discussion earlier, which I thought was really interesting, is that that deadline really kind of made the thing that we were trying to get to a priority. It made the bid at the time the priority, the number one priority in what he was doing. So what started to happen as the deadline crept up is that thing, he allowed it to take over, and he allowed his focus to take over, his full focus, and he's dismissed everything else because this was now the pressured thing to do. This was the thing that he had to focus on. And so he immersed himself in it. And when he immersed himself in it in that way, the creativity flowed. New ideas started coming through. Stuff started sparking. The writing and the stuff that was coming together, it was absolutely amazing. We won the bid. We won all the bids that he's done in that way. So there's a kind of, we can start to build a picture of how, when we, what we do is we say, well, the pressure of a deadline makes me focus on this thing, and what happens is, well, and what we actually equate is pressure of deadline makes me creative. Pressure of deadline means that I come up with new ideas. Actually, what I want to just pull out is that process that's going through, in that the pressure of the deadline, what that does is make everything kind of make you focus on this thing and really immerse yourself in it. You don't have to have a deadline to do it. You don't have to have a deadline in order to completely immerse yourself in it and make it the most important thing in the world. And I think that's the thing that gives us the creativity, just the acceptance that, okay, I'm now going to fully focus on this one thing and see what comes through. And so I'd really encourage you to play with that. I'd really encourage you, and maybe it's pick a task, pick something that that you've got going on at the moment. Maybe it's the thing I asked you to choose in a minute, and just notice, well, if you remove the deadline, but you gave yourself permission to fully focus on this thing, and just really immerse yourself in it, could you achieve the same result? And I don't know whether you could. It might be something that you need to practice, and it might be something that you need to play with, because you've been probably practicing the use of deadlines for a long time. But if you could find a way of doing it without deadlines, without the pressure, wouldn't that be an interesting way of living your life? It might be that you enjoyed it more as a result. So I just want to unpick that and just encourage you to question the fact that we need pressure in order to get this zing and this buzz and this creativity, and just encourage you to think about what's actually happening, and the fact that when we immerse ourselves in something and when we allow ourselves to get into the flow, that's really when the creativity comes through. So deadlines are useful for that. Deadlines. And I'm just going to sort of say, if you've got any questions that come up, I'm just going to repeat this. If any questions, any kind of things where you're thinking, yeah, that might work there, but this isn't working for me in my situation, please share. Let's have a talk about it. I'll come back to stuff as we go along, but also at the end. So if there's any specific things that you're thinking that doesn't work for me, then do tell me about it. And because I'd love to, I guess I'm not saying that this is completely truth. I'm just trying to explore some of the insights that I've seen, and I'd love to hear and explore it with you to see if we can help you to shift and to see things and live things more in an easier way. So please do share. Let's explore it, whether it's on the live or whether it's afterwards. I'm happy to kind of talk about it in that way. So pressure of deadlines can be useful, and the other thing that came up for me when I started thinking about this is, how do deadlines get into our culture? How do we use deadlines in our culture? Because we use them, so we must think that they are useful. And for me, when we start looking back into our childhood, deadlines are used at school. We have a deadline about how a child should be developed by a certain age, and how they should know certain things by certain times. And then we start pushing that onto the child about, you need to do your exams at this stage, you should know all these things by the age of 16, and you should know even more by the time you're 18, and know what you're doing in your career by the time you go off to university. And so all of these deadlines, they're built into our culture. And then we get to work, and work is just kind of dominated by deadlines. Business is works in this way. It works off the kind of the time stamped, we need you to deliver this task by this time. So it's not a surprise that we work to deadlines, because it's in our culture. But I guess I'm just sort of starting to question that and saying, is that useful? Is it useful for the kids to be judged and kind of told whether they're good at something or not by the particular age? Is that helping them to grow and develop? I know so many people who they didn't do maths at school. They dropped maths early because they didn't get it, and then came back to it later in life, and thankfully didn't accept that they weren't any good at maths. I even know someone who's a prof of computer science who dropped maths and left school at 16, and he's now a professor of computer science. So there's something wrong with our system where we're starting to judge, and we're keeping on judging, and we're putting pressure all the way through. But at some stage, we've decided that this is a useful part of our culture. And so I just really want to, there must be something in there. And I think the thing that it pushes us is it pushes us to achieve. And like I said, it pushes us to test ourselves if you've got the right mindset. But that doesn't work for everyone. Some people it pushes in a different direction. And that's what I want to talk about next, is that how does that work against us? So how can that pressure, when we feel under pressure, although for some people it can feel really creative, it can also push us out of our flow, out of our creativity, and it can start to really build and really feel intense and really feel overwhelming. And actually, when we let it can push us into burnout, and it can make us ill. It can make us seriously ill. And I think that's a lot of things that we're seeing now, and we've been seeing for ages, but people are starting to speak out a lot more about how the pressure of work, the deadlines at work, the overwhelm, and that it's just not helping them to perform at work. So what I see happening here, and this is the alternative impact of pressure, is that what happens is that instead of pushing us into that flow state where we completely focus on something, pressure can also push us into a really busy mind. It can push us into stress, and it can push us into overwhelm. And especially if we're juggling multiple deadlines, if we've got lots and lots of things that we're trying to fit, we can't focus on one thing to the extreme of everything else. What we have to do is kind of constantly jump from one thing to another. And so our creativity just disappears, and we feel completely wiped out as a result of that. But we don't admit it, and we feel like we have to keep on running, and we have to keep on catching up, because all of these things that we've committed to, we don't want to admit that we are a failure. We don't want to admit that we didn't get it right, and we take it as meaning something about ourselves. But actually what I'm suggesting is that it's the way that we've constructed our culture doesn't support us naturally, doesn't support us as humans. So we are not effective in the way that we're responding. And so the thing that I really want to highlight in these two things is that if you're someone that thrives in pressure, absolutely fantastic. But if you're not, and if you feel that the pressure works against you and makes you less effective, and even sometimes you might be in one camp, sometimes you might be another, sometimes you might that pressure of a deadline can really help, but then it flips you into something else. The thing that I'm saying is notice it. And the way you notice the difference is in the feeling. So how does this pressure feel for you? If that pressure feels good, yeah, don't need to do anything about it. If that pressure starts to feel overwhelming, then let's step back and let's go back to, right, what is a deadline? Okay, it's a set of expectations and measures against a task for a particular time. Well, what can we start to do to unpick that? And this is where now I just like to slip into kind of thinking about this as a game. So let's just take a look at it. So I love games. They've taught me so much, and I didn't used to love games. I used to hate the way that games put pressure on me to perform and to kind of win and all this sort of stuff. But what's happened is that I've started to notice, and as I've started to grow more into games and start to enjoy them and playing them rather than winning at them, actually it's made things a lot easier for me. So I think this is a really lovely analogy that comes through. So if we start to look at a deadline and a task, achieving a task as a game, okay, so we're setting win conditions. We've got to achieve it by a particular time, and we've got to hit all these conditions, the quality level, the expectations that we set. So we're setting the win conditions for this game. And we also set the rules for the game. We start to look at, well, how am I going to achieve it? What are the ways that I can do it? You might be that you put into your head the rule that, well, I can't ask anyone else to help me about this. That might be your rule, or it might be that it has to be done within particular time and within particular budget and in a particular order. We start to add rules in about how we play and what's okay and what's not. Now, when we start to think about it as a game and start to look at it as, well, okay, so here's the win conditions, here's the rules. Are they true? Do they have to be? Are we making some assumptions there? And when we start to step away and look at that and sort of think, well, okay, that particular deadline, and I'd really encourage you to pick something that's a deadline. I'm going to pick for now. Let's just think about I have a talk that I'm doing next week. I have a talk that I'm being filmed by someone external. So it's an external deadline in the sense that the time is set by someone else. And there's some creativity that I need to do around it to make the talk into something. And I need to set up and start asking myself some questions. Now, my task for today was to start thinking about the questions that I wanted to answer in that talk. And I haven't done it. Now, I can start to feel the pressure on that. But I can also start to step back and kind of go, well, okay, so my deadline of today, yeah, that's me just setting it internally. My deadline of next week, yeah, okay, that's a bit more serious in some ways. But then there's other things that I'm playing with. So the win conditions that I might have created for the quality level of me showing up and the expectations I have around the questions that I'm going to answer and how well I do it, that's something that actually I'm setting some rules around that. I'm setting some conditions around that. I'm setting some expectations around that aren't necessarily true. And just that act of questioning those things, I find really releases the pressure. It's like I'm trying to find a way to cheat at the game, but I can't cheat because I've defined the rules, and it doesn't matter if I cheat because if it means that I would play a much more fun game and enjoy it more, then actually for me that's the bigger aim of the game. So I'm now starting to think about, well, I'm going to add in a win condition of enjoying it, and I'm going to prioritize the enjoying creating this thing over getting it perfect. Oh, well, that changes it. How can that change? Well, yeah, that's a different win condition, and suddenly I'm playing a different game. And maybe I'm going to add in, well, I'd really like to kind of just connect with some people over it a bit more. So maybe I could have some conversations and get some other ideas about it instead. And so suddenly, instead of it being a thing that I'm really driving myself to do, the game's changed and the way I'm playing it's changed, and it starts to feel more enjoyable. Well, I'd love to know if this is resonating, so please do tell me if this is helping you and if you're seeing it slightly different. And I guess the reason that for me I can see this helps is because what it encourages me to do is, instead of being completely immersed in the game and what's going on, it allows me to step back and question, and it allows me to step back and get curious and start to think about, well, what do I want? Where do I fit into this? And it also allows me to start to see that I'm not the game, I'm playing the game. So that means that if I don't win, if I lose the game, that's not me. That's just the way I've played it this time. Next time I'll play it differently. If I fail, then that's not me being a failure. It just means, you know what, I got the strategy wrong this time. And so it starts to release the pressure. And when that pressure starts to release, our minds open up and the creativity starts to come through again. And this is when our mind starts to settle, when our busyness, that busyness that kind of comes through, that when pressure's working against us, when that intensity starts to disappear, then we start to feel more creative as a result. So really what I'd encourage you to do is just start to think of your deadlines, instead of kind of getting engrossed in them being truth, which I think we can do, about being kind of dead lines where we're going to get shot if we don't kind of cross that line. Step back and see it as a game. Bring some lightness to it. Bring some playfulness to it. How can you play around the edges with it? And just let me know what comes to you. And so earlier on, I shared a post, I think it was yesterday, about sharing one of the things you can ways of releasing the pressure is by admitting the truth and having a truthful conversation. So this is another way of just starting to change the rules of the game, is that you may have made a commitment to someone and that you're not going to deliver against. They're the ones who are expecting something. And what we tend to do is we get caught up in, oh, I need to deliver, otherwise I'm going to let them down. But actually, sometimes just stepping back and having a conversation and saying, do you know what, I don't know if I'm going to achieve this, releases the pressure. And instead of us not achieving it, what happens is that our creativity buzzes through and we find a new way to do it. And that's happened to me so often that when I let go of needing to hit it, needing to deliver against other people's requirements, suddenly I've got a new insight about how to go about this. So just starting to play with the rules, the rule of I can't communicate, I can't change the wind conditions. Who says? Who is the one that says that? Is it just you creating that rule? Really? Have you tested it? Go on and explore and just start asking those questions. And what's the worst that can happen? So that's kind of the main things that I wanted to share. If you've got any questions, I don't think I've had any comments so far. It's lovely to see a couple of people watching there. And it's lovely to see you. Please do, if you've got any questions that you want that come up, then please do to ask them. And if you're watching on replay as well, please do add that in. The final thing I just wanted to say, because these ideas, like I said at the beginning, they can feel quite abstract until you start applying them somewhere. So what I'd really encourage you to do is just to step back and take the next step. So and I always like a kind of taking a small step, take this small step and go and apply this. And for me, the easiest way of doing that is to grab pick a deadline that you have, pick something simple and something small and play with this. So for me, the way I've started to play with this is on my to-do list, on my daily to-do list, and just noticing. I jot down a list of things that I want to get done in a day. That's kind of what I do at the beginning. It helps me remember and it helps me kind of come back to it. And those things that feel urgent and feel like they've got a deadline on that day, it gives me a reminder so I don't forget. But what I then start to do is add other things to it. So just when I'm doing that and when I'm adding things to it, I'm starting to notice the wind conditions that I'm setting for the day. And then as I'm so noticing, that is great, because it means that, okay, I can choose that some of these things aren't quite so important. If I just get a couple of these things done today, then that's okay. What's the minimum I need to do? What's the minimum win condition I need to achieve? So start noticing that, and then start questioning, okay, what rules am I putting against how I'm going to achieve them? Are they needed? And you don't have to do this every time, but just notice what the feeling is associated with those things. When you look at that list, is it a feeling of pressure or is it a feeling of excitement? Go with, if it's a feeling of pressure, start to pull things away, start to let go of some stuff, question the rules, question the win conditions. If it's a feeling of excitement, bloody get going. Yeah, enjoy it. Enjoy what's going on and notice what happens when you do it that way as well. So just start to play with it and notice the feeling. And it's the feeling that will tell you when you're pushing yourself into pressure and when you might be taking yourself too far. So just kind of trusting and noticing, that will mean that you're more likely to stay in a place of creativity. You're more likely to come up with new ideas. You're more likely to kind of get that buzz, and you're more likely to enjoy it. And that's the last thing that I'm going to just throw in, is that I have started, and I would recommend throwing into that kind of thing, into your win conditions, the enjoy it level. And making that, because you can always enjoy something that you're doing. You can always find a way to enjoy it. And sometimes it's just about giving yourself permission to enjoy it. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today. I hope this has been useful. As I said, if you've got any comments, questions, please do drop them below. And if this is something that is that you have you've got a particular thing that you want to go deeper on, that you want to explore any of these areas, if you're struggling with pressure or anything like that, then feel free to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to have a conversation, and a deeper conversation that we can have on social media. So if you want to DM me and you want to share what's going on and you want to do it privately, then please do get in touch. We can set up a conversation, we can figure out how I can help you, and whether it's through coaching sessions or whether there's some resources that I can point you towards, please do just drop me a line. I'll help as best I can. And I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.